now. I'm going to start right at 11, which I have 11 right now. You ready?
Sounds good.
Okay.
The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Welcome to the DBA Fundamentals virtual chapter meeting for April. Today's presentation is getting started with Azure's SQL database. It's going to be presented by Warner Chavez. I'm going to turn things over to Warner in a few minutes, but I want to talk about a few other things. My name is Steve Cantrell, and I'm the chapter co-leader of the DBA Fundamentals virtual chapter. You can send us questions anytime by going to the About Us tab at our site, fundamentals.sqlpass.org. We have some summits coming up. The Business Analytics Conference in Santa Clara, California on April the 20th through the 22nd. You can go to passbaconference.com and you can save $150 if you're going to this by using the code BAVCDF. You can also get it at any other virtual chapter. They have a contest where we're giving away one pass to the conference for the most people that get referred using that code. So sign up for that if you want to. Now, as far as the past summit in Seattle in October of this year, there's a date coming up, 4/20, by the way, where the cost goes up $300. So if you're going to pass this October, I would certainly think about doing something before you go. We haven't got our discount codes yet, but we should have them in a week, so keep an eye on our website. So if you're planning on going to the summit, you could save $450 at least if you do it before the 20th. So definitely think about that. Okay. Today, like I said, we have Warner Chavez presenting Getting Started with Azure SQL Database. Warner's a SQL Server Certified Master and Principal Consultant at Pythian, a global Canadian-based company specializing in DBA services. After working for enterprise customers and HP's ITOA organization, he transformed to his current position at Pythian, managing multiple customers and instances while leading a highly talented team of SQL DBAs. He's well-versed in a lot of different areas, so I'm going to turn everything over to Warner right now. There you go, Warner.
No, thanks, Steve, and thanks everybody for joining us today. It's a pleasure to be here presenting for the Fundamentals chapter on something that, is fairly new technology. It's kind of like a mix of the old and the new. It's the SQL Server that most of us are familiar with and are comfortable with, mixed with the cloud capabilities of Microsoft's Azure. And I hope I'll be able to give you guys in 1 hour a pretty good overview, a pretty good idea of what the service is all about and how it is different as well from what you're used to on your own premises, your own data center, your own servers. Okay. So a very short about me. Like Steve said, I've been a DBA for about 10 years now. I used to work at HP. I work now at Pythian, which is a managed services and consulting company based out of Ottawa, Ontario, in Canada. I'm SQL Server MCM and MVP. You can shoot me a tweet at warchaff over there. You guys can see it. Send me an email at warner@sqlturbo.com. If you guys want to check out my personal blog, it's sqlturbo.com. And also my employer's site. It also has a technical blog in there as well. It's pythian.com. Okay. So what's going to be the agenda for today? And my main goal really is to give everybody a good introduction and overview of the Azure SQL database service. So I'm going to cover really quick, just going to show you guys how you can sign up for the free trial, show you guys the portal, how you navigate on the portal, show you guys as well what happens when you connect to the service from Management Studio. We're going to talk about the different service levels. So like most of the things in the cloud, there is some kind of, service or standard categories that you can pick. Like let's say you can make your database, in this case it's basic, standard, and premium, and then we'll see what you're getting, for each one of those categories. And that's really the key component to understand the Azure SQL Database Service. You want to have it really clear what you're getting when you say, oh, I'm signing up for like an S1 or S2 or a P1 or a P2. And we'll go over that today, so it'll be really clear for everybody. And then just as a curiosity, try to like pique the interest of everybody, I'm going to talk very briefly about new features of SQL Server that are coming to the cloud first, right? So Microsoft's strategy now is really, like they said, it's cloud first, mobile first, and then they rolled those into the in-the-box products. So we're at the point now where Azure SQL Database actually has features that the in-the-box SQL Server, not even SQL 2014, has. So it's really interesting. It's kind of like getting like a sneak peek of the future of SQL Server by playing around with the cloud databases. So I'm going to touch a little bit on that, and I'm going to do a quick demo just to show you guys a couple of cool things that you can do now that you can't do with SQL yet. Okay. So first thing, just signing up. I'll probably be uploading these slides to my blog as well, so everybody can just download them and get the link from there. If you just go and search for Azure free trial, you'll land on that same link anyway. I'll just show you guys what the actual screen looks like. Let me show you here. So let me switch to my browser. And so you can get a free 1-month trial. They'll give you $200 to spend on any Azure service for 1 month. $200 actually sounds like, oh my God, that's like not a lot of money, but for playing around with just what Azure is, it's actually quite a bit of money. With $200, you can probably create some SQL databases. You can create some, if you're into development, you could create like a website. You could create some virtual machines with SQL Server on them and just play around with it a little bit. So definitely worth it to try it out. And then after that, if you want to keep using it, you would have to punch in credit card info, and you could give them like a limit of how much you want to spend. Or any of you that already has an MSDN subscription, that is, I find with many people that I talk to them about it, that a lot of people know they have MSDN, but they use it mostly for the software downloads, and they don't realize that you actually get a certain amount of dollars every month renewed from MSDN just to play around with Azure as well. So that's a great benefit of having an MSDN subscription. And many places, you might be able to get one from your employer, or your company might already have a certain amount, or if you're a Microsoft partner, you already get a certain amount as well, and it's just a matter of taking advantage of it. So that's, option number one. If you just want to play around with it, go ahead and set up an account, and you'll get your free 1 month. And like I said, there's a lot of stuff that you can play around with in 1 month, and then decide if you want to try to get an MSDN membership, or if you just want to put it in your own credit card to play around with it going forward. Okay. So let me go back here to the slides. And so talking about specifics, so that was signing up for Azure itself for the entire Microsoft service, but going back to the specific of what is really Azure SQL Database. So it's what it's called Database as a Service. So some of you may be familiar as well with Amazon. Amazon has its own cloud service called AWS, Amazon Web Services, and they also have a database as a service offering. You might have heard of it. It's called RDS. So this is the same concept from Microsoft Azure. It's basically packaging a database and trying to take away some of the more painful or time-consuming mechanic parts of administering a database away. So for example, when I say it's fully managed by Microsoft, they will take care of any patching that has to be done. They'll do it, and it'll be transparent to you. The backups, they'll take care of that. You don't have to worry about it. You pick a performance level, so you don't have to worry exactly about, oh, do I need more RAM, do I need more disk, do I need more CPU? What you do is that you pick a performance level, and then if you see that you're really not using all your performance level, then you can go down and pay less. Or if you find that you're still need a little bit more power, you can change to a higher performance level and pay a little bit more, right? So it's an elastic service in that way as well, where you can scale up or scale down on the service any way you want it. It's different from the SQL Server on-premise because it is not a full instance, and this is really what is the hardest thing to understand for most people. The difference between just having a database as a service and having a full instance. So when you have a full instance, you really have control over many things that are global to SQL Server and that are very tightly dependent on the computer itself. For example, a classic feature, file groups. So file groups are something that you use to work around your storage, to work around how you organize all these different tables in your database, and you might add some extra file groups because you have a different storage, or you might add some extra file groups because let's say you wanted to do some kind of partitioning. All this is taken away from you basically for your own convenience or simplicity, right? So when you're getting a database as a service, they'll take away things like, for example, file groups, because file groups are very tightly dependent on your storage and how you're configuring your storage, how you're configuring the computer, the server itself, be it a VM or be it an actual physical server. So these concepts that are very tightly dependent on the underlying operating system and hardware are not part of database as a service. So, for example, probably most of you are familiar with the store procedure spconfigure, where you're able to set all these different flags at the instance level. So that kind of thing is not available on Azure. Why? Because you're not supposed to think about the instance itself, unlike the things that you can play around, really deep level configuration. It's all about just having a database and focusing on, you know, the quality of the code in your database, focusing on the security features, focusing on the performance, and not having to worry about the more deeper, finer grain configurations and the more tightly dependent, tightly coupled configurations to you know, hardware or the operating system itself. And finally, it used to be two size-based tiers. It was called Web and Business. So if you Google around for Azure and you find a lot of references about Web and Business Edition, just keep in mind these are legacy terms. They're deprecated at this point. Microsoft is not going to continue providing service on Web and Business at some point, and everything now is 3 different service level based tiers. And we'll go through each service level based tier and what each one is as we go through the slides, okay? So this is a very quick just before and after. So before it was Web and Business, and it was purely based on size. So you had a limit. I think Web was up to 5 gigs, and I think Business was up to 150 gigs, and that's it. You paid for size. So if your database was 20 gigs, you paid an amount, and if your database was 40 gigs, you paid a different amount. That is gone now. Now you have 3 service tiers and sub-tiers inside one of those. So we have Basic. Basic doesn't have any sub-tiers. It's just that. It's Basic. And I'll go through the details on each one as we go through the slides. But Basic is just that. It's Basic. Standard is divided into 4 tiers from 0 to 3. And Premium is divided into 3 tiers from 1 to 3. Okay? So let's go over each one, and then we'll start talking about each one in more detail and what you get with each one. So Basic is, I would say, is more for development work or for very small departmental databases. Something that, you know, has maybe like 1 or 2 users, and you know, you don't want to keep spending any of your energy, and it doesn't have like crazy performance constraints. Obviously, it can't be really big because it's a size limit of only 2 gigs. You're only allowed to do a point-in-time restore of 7 days. So Microsoft will keep all your backups for up to 7 days, and you can restore during that time and go back on that time. For disaster recovery on Basic, what you're allowed to do is to do a geo restore to another Azure region. So what that means is that, for example, if I have my database on East US data center and something happens, then I can restore a copy of the database on another Azure data center. So I could go into like West US and restore a copy of my database from the Azure service. Okay. There's a feature of auditing. It's very similar to the SQL auditing feature that you can get on the on-premise SQL server, and it's allowed on all the service tiers. So basically you activate the auditing, and then after you do that, different events write into an audit log on Azure storage as well. Now the last point there, you guys will see I have there that says performance 5 DTUs. So I will go a little bit deeper into the whole DTU thing later on the slide deck. For now, the only thing you need to keep in mind is that the DTU is called a database throughput unit, and it's really just a measurement of database performance. Okay, so and the most value out of that unit is as a comparison point. Okay, so if you're familiar with SQL Server, for example, you guys know that, for example, plans have cost, but the costs themselves don't have units. It's just so that is used as a comparison unit. It's kind of like that. So DTUs are more like a comparison unit, and the actual number, how they came up with it, was based on an internal benchmark done by the Azure SQL database team. So basically, they created a benchmark, and then they got, you know, on a certain configuration that they use for the basic databases, they got X amount of performance, and then on the next tier, they got, you know, X times 5. So let's say that's how they came up with, okay, so we'll give it 5 DTUs on basic, and then because let's say standard 1 was 4 times faster, then we'll do that, we'll call it 20 DTUs, right? So it's really more of a comparison unit. And I'll go a little bit deeper into that, and we'll do a demo as well so you guys see the difference in the DTUs. But for now, just keep it in mind, it's a performance comparison unit. That's what it is. And it's a blended measure. So I'll go into it a little bit later on. Next level is called standard. So usually what happens is on these sub-tiers, well, for example, for standard and premium, they will all have a common set of features, and then when you need to decide between like 0, 1, 2, or 3, it's purely based on performance. So first off, you guys can see that the size limit is in, you know, a big difference between basic and standard. We're talking about a jump from a 2 gig to a 250 gig database. So now we're playing on an arena where you might be thinking of more things that could be put on Azure SQL database, right? A way bigger size limit. We're talking about 250 gigabytes, right? Point-in-time restore, now it's not 1 week, it's 2 weeks. For disaster recovery, you can do the same thing you did with basic, which is, you know, restore a backup on another data center, another Azure data center. But also with standard, you can do standard geo-replication. I'll go a little bit in a slide coming up about the difference between standard and something else called active geo-replication. It's a pretty simple concept, but just keep in mind for now that, you know, you can do geo-replication for at the standard level. Okay. And auditing is allowed. It's allowed on all the tiers, like I said before. And then if you guys look at that, look at the numbers for S0, S1, S2, S3. So each one pretty much doubles on roughly to the next. So we have the 10 DTUs. So 10 DTUs, you guys remember basic was 5, right? So it means an S0 should roughly be about double the throughput of a basic database. An S1 should roughly be about 4 times, an S2 should roughly be about 10 times, and an S3 should roughly be about 20 times the performance, okay? And the last level is a premium. So premium, again, the size limit is doubled. So we're talking, you know, fairly respectable size of a database. We're talking about 0.5 terabyte is your limit. You're allowed to do point-in-time restores further back in time. So we're talking about 35 days. you're allowed to do all the previous ones, so you can do the geographic restore, you can do the standard georeplication, and then you can do the active georeplication. Like I said, we'll go a little bit further on what standard or active georeplication means. On the latest version of Azure SQL Database, they added even more features to Premium. So Premium now you're allowed to do partitioning, which you were not allowed to do before on the previous tiers. Premium as well, you're allowed to do column stores. So any of you that are familiar with the concept of column store indexes, this is available now in Azure at the Premium level. And the performance levels, again, they double the first two, and then it's a big leap into number 3. So 100 DTUs, 200 DTUs, 1,000 DTUs. So if we look at it, 100 DTUs, again, is about 20 times what a basic would be. Then 200 DTUs, so we're talking about 40 times what a basic would be. And then we go all the way to 1,000 DTUs, right? So it's 200 times more power than a basic database at that point. Okay. And now I'm just going to go over real quick. So what's the difference between standard and active georeplication? So if you guys remember, standard georeplication is available for both standard and premium service levels, and active georeplication is only available for the premium level. Okay. So on the standard georeplication, your restore time objective is less than 2 hours. It means that if there's a loss of service for some reason, in less than 2 hours, you'll be able to run queries against your replica copy. Okay? And then the RPO is less than 30 minutes, which means if there's any issue with the data center, your standard georeplicated copy will be available, or there won't be any data loss further than 30 minutes. So that's like Microsoft service level agreement with you as a user of their service. Okay. Now we're talking about active, then you get tighter SLAs. So your restore time objective on active, it's less than 1 hour, so you will be available in less than 1 hour on the other site. And then the restore point objective, they will guarantee that you get less than 5 minutes of data loss in case that they have an issue with their main data center where you have your Azure SQL database. Okay. And then the other two advantages that Active has is that Active allows you to do failover and failback whenever you want. Standard is limited. Only when actually Microsoft has an issue will they allow you to failover. And then the other bigger difference is that Active allows you to have read-only replicas. So this is very similar, for example, to the always-on availability groups that some of you might be familiar with. So those, in an always-on availability group, if you guys remember, in 2012, you're allowed up to 4 read-only replicas. In 2014, you're allowed up to 8. And Azure right now, you can put up to 4 read-only replicas, but it's only available on the premium level, okay? And if you want to use a replica just for high availability, I believe they'll charge you a smaller fee, so you won't pay full price. But if you want to use a replica in Azure as a read-only, so you're actually going to be running queries off of it, they'll charge you full price for each replica that you have, basically. Okay. So let's just go into and show you guys a little bit more of the actual material. So let's see. Let's walk through the portal, what it looks like, and also Management Studio, and also going to walk really quick through the pricing for the service. So I have this already saved here. So this is the pricing page. So a basic level, they charge by the hour. So the way it works is that Microsoft will charge you for 1 hour. So if you were using, let's say, basic, and then you decide to switch to standard, then they'll charge you 1 hour of standard. And then if you decide to switch back to basic, they'll still charge you for that 1 hour that you were standard. And then on the next hour, they'll go back to charging you basic. Okay, so basically, like I said, it's based on an per hour service billing. So basic tier, just going off here off of the latest posted prices, because this is right off the Azure website. We're talking about $5 a month for a basic database. On standard, a standard 0, we're talking about $15 a month. On standard 1, we're talking about $30 a month. Standard 2 is $75. Standard 3 is $150. Premium, they are considerably more expensive. So if you want to, if you think you need a premium database in Azure, you really want to do a good cost analysis. Just make sure that you are actually saving money by moving to the Azure SQL database. So usually you have to think about that. You're not going to be paying for licensing, you're not going to be paying for hardware, and you're not going to be paying for anybody to manage the patching or the backups or the replication. All that is going to be done for you. Okay, so that's how you really can get the most value out of the service. Because we see it like a P1, Premium 1, will be about $465 a month. A P2 will be $930 a month, and the biggest one, which is the P3, we're talking about $3,720 a month, right? So over a year, that's a lot of money. That's, you could actually, could buy licenses and just do it yourself at that point, but it depends on how optimized you are in terms of how much it would actually cost you to deploy your own hardware or deploy your own virtualization and then manage everything on your own. So you really have to analyze and sit down and see if it makes sense financially, especially on the higher premium tiers where the cost per month is a big leap over from the standard ones. Okay, so this is just the pricing page. Let's just jump over. I'm going to show you guys here what the portal looks like. So this is the new portal. There's two different portals in the Azure landscape right now. If you guys can see here on the corner, it actually says this is a preview. So I just want to show you guys how everything looks. Let me refresh this one. So this is the legacy, well, what would be legacy portal. And it looks a little bit different. Let me sign in real quick. So this is the portal that Microsoft released Azure with. If you guys can see, it's really easy. It's like all the services are here on the left panel, and then you get a big list of all the items that you have. For example, I can go here to SQL databases, and then I'll get all my SQL databases. I get their status, if I have any replication on them, where are they located, so you guys can see if I have them on different editions, then what's my size limit as well. And this is the old portal. Okay, so this is the first version. Now Microsoft is moving away slowly. It's porting functionality from this portal over to this other portal. So this other portal is like the new way of how it looks, and it has a different navigation thing. So it's not just like a panel to the left and then you click on it and you get some information on the main page. It's more what they call a blades type of interface. I'll show you guys what I mean by that. So every time I click on something here, it's going to open what they call a new blade, right? So for example, right now there I can go browse and then SQL servers, and I just click on that. And then you guys will see a new tab opens, and I have two servers that I can pick from. And if I pick, for example, this server test databases, then it just opens again a new blade to the side with the detailed information about this particular server, right? And then you guys can see, for example, I can see the amount of DTUs, which I mentioned was like the performance that I'm consuming off of that server, and you can see how many I still have left. And then you can go into, for example, the actual specific databases. I can go to SQL databases here, and then I'll get a list of all the SQL databases that I own. And if I click on one of them, it's the same concept. So it opens up a new blade, and I get the information from my databases as well. So if I used any, it gives me a quick performance graph, a quick connections graph. It'll tell me what tier I'm in. So it'll say like basic and how much space I'm using and whatnot. Okay. And this is pretty much how you navigate on the online portion. So once I want to connect to it, there's basically one special thing that you do have to do to connect to it. So your servers are all behind the firewall, and in order to access it, you have to set up your IP to be able to access a particular server. So let me show you guys here. So if I go on the servers, I then go on settings, and then I get something here that says the firewall. And then at this point, I can add IP addresses that are allowed to connect to this server. Because remember, this is all on the cloud, right? So we don't want just some random people trying to get access to your SQL databases. So you have to whitelist the IPs that you want to have access to your SQL server, okay? So only specific IPs are going to have access to your SQL server, and then after that, you also have to have your SQL logins as well. So you're going to have two basic levels of security is your firewall settings, and then number two, you're actually going to have a SQL login that you will use to log in. So for example, here, right here, this IP that I have here is the one that I have configured on my lab environment. So if I go now into my VM, I'll show you guys. So I can connect to the different cloud databases I have. And let me just zoom in so you guys can see over there. So this is the way that you can connect to them. So for example, my server was called testdbs. So you use a URL that's basically the name of your server .database.windows.net, and you can reach this this address from anywhere that has internet connectivity. The only thing, like I said, is that you won't be allowed to connect if you did not whitelist your particular firewall. Okay? So that's pretty much how it is. And then once you have it on Management Studio, just show you guys, I'm connected. I can open this up. I can see the databases. So the only databases, that system database that I'll be able to see is the master database. Everything else is you can't see. I can, for example, open up a particular database and I can get the views inside it, the tables. So this is a very similar experience to what you're used to on Management Studio once you actually log into a database. And then you can add users to your database as well. And like I said, this is how you would normally connect to the server. As an admin as well, if, for example, if you're connected to master, you will have access to the logins. So it's very similar to what you're used to on SQL Server on-premise. You would create a login for somebody, and then you would create them a user inside a particular database. Okay? And that's pretty much the experience there, which is browsing through the portal and what you get with Management Studio as well. All right. Okay, so let me show you guys as well. I wanted to show next a demo of what a point-in-time restore looks like, just to show you guys how easy it is to do these capabilities, and why it's nice to have it as a cloud thing where you don't have to worry about these things. So for example, if I go here and I just want to, again, go to Browse, and I want to go to my SQL databases. Once I have the list of my databases, I can pick any of them. So, for example, I have this database called T1, so I can pick it. I'll wait for the blade to open for this one. And then you guys can see here there's a menu at the top, and it says delete, it says restore, something that says open in Visual Studio, copy, export. So I can click on restore. And then it gives me an option here to restore as a specific name. For example, I can say like T1 restore copy. I can pick a server. I'm just going to leave it on that same server that I have, testDBs. And then I can pick a point in time to restore back. So if you guys remember, basic was about 1 week back in time. So that's what I'm allowed to do here on the control. So you guys can see I'm allowed to basically take from the 31st up to today. And then I can say, for example, if I want to restore my point in time from Saturday and pick sometime on Saturday, whatever, let's just pick midnight. So I want to go back to Saturday midnight, and I want to call it T1 underscore restore copy. And then once you just picked your time and the name, you just click on create. And then the service, off it goes. It's going to start restoring the database. And if I go here to the notifications on the side, I basically get a message that just says, creating a SQL database from restore. Okay, and that's going to take a couple of minutes, and it's going to create a new database there, basically with the restored copy from Saturday from that test database that I have. Okay, so that's how easy it is. I'll just leave that running there now, and then we'll check it back later on as we go through the slides and the demo. Okay, so let's go back into the other big concept to get here about Azure SQL Database, which is the DTU, that performance throughput unit that I mentioned before. Because basically, based on the DTUs is how you're going to pick if you want to get, for example, a standard 0 or a standard 1, or if you're going to go premium, if you're going to pick from premium 1 or premium 2. So the DTU, like I said, is mostly valuable as a comparison unit, and it's a comparison unit of integrated database performance. So the number actually is supposed to signify a blend of CPU, a data I/O, so reads and writes to data, a log I/O, so mostly write into the transaction log, and memory, right? So it's not like, oh, a certain percentage is just CPU, a certain percentage is just data, a certain percentage is just log. It's just blended, and it's not really published exactly how much each one of those is a factor in. That's why I usually tell people just think of it as a comparison unit, because we don't know exactly, like, we don't know if one DTU is supposed to be one CPU core or something like that, right? Like the benchmark and the unit was created by the Azure SQL database team just so that you would have an idea of comparison in performance, right? So if I'm getting a certain performance on basic and I want to get 20 times more, so I should pick 100 DTUs because basic is 5, right? So that's the value of the unit, really. And it's based on internal benchmark from the Azure team, okay? So let's look at, for example, just some of the capabilities that you would expect based on that benchmark done by the Azure team, right? So on basic, we're talking about 5 DTUs. Basic level will have up to 30 threads, and we'll have up to 300 sessions. So if you guys remember, you can have a session, and as long as the session is not active, it's not going to be consuming a thread, right? But, for example, if you had 300 sessions and then you wanted to activate all 300 at the same time, you would not be able to do that in BASIC. You would probably get some kind of error, maybe saying that you ran out of your connection pool. Because basically when you have only 30 maximum threads, it means you will be able to service up to 30 simultaneous requests at the same time without getting any issues about running out of threads, right? So you can see that in the benchmark, the amount of performance is not specified by the minute or by the second. On basic, it's specified by the hour. So we're talking about, I think it says 16,000 transactions per hour, right? If we move to standard, we'll see, well, we get 60 threads and we get 600 maximum sessions. So at that point, again, we can do 60 concurrent activities on a standard 0, and then we're talking about transactions per minute. So you could do 521 transactions per minute. If as we go down the table, you guys can see we get more capabilities as regarding to threads. We get more capabilities as regarding total sessions that we can keep open, and we get more capabilities as far as just pure throughput, right? So once we go down all the way down to the performance 3, we can see that we can get 1600 maximum threads. We're talking about 1600 simultaneous queries that we could be running at the same time. 19,000 maximum sessions. So we're talking about a system that can definitely have a good chunk of users, right? You would easily have 1,500 users using a P3 database if it's well architected, just because there's no limit in the service itself to that amount. You can have up to 1,600 threads, right? And then we're talking about 735 transactions per second on this Azure benchmark that they did. So it's something where, again, you would expect that you can have 1,600 users, and half of them could run transaction every second, and you would still be fine, right? So that's also why the bigger premium tiers are more expensive, is because their performance is really more up to the level of what some good beefy on-premise hardware would be like. So the cost benefit might still be there if you take a look into how much it costs to manage your own SQL server, how much it costs to license, how much it costs to pay for the hardware or for the virtualization layer as well. Okay. So just to show you guys the comparison, we're going to jump back into the VM, and then I'm going to run a couple of queries on basic, and then I have the exact same database set up as a standard database, and then we'll see the difference in performance from the two of them. Okay. So let me switch back again. And I already have some pre-made SQL query stress sessions. So if you guys might be familiar with this tool, it was created by Anna Mechanic, and you basically connect to a database, and it can be, in this case, I have it set up to connect to my cloud database. You guys can see here. And it's transparent. As long as you use the SQL Server native client, or there's also, I think the JDBC driver also supports Azure. I think the ADO.NET also supports Azure. So as long as the driver supports Azure, it's pretty transparent. And in this one, I'm connecting right now to a basic database. So all I'm going to do is to show you guys, I have this table called Azure Partition Test, and it has 5,000 rows. And all I'm doing is I'm going to be selecting from it, and I'm going to ask Azure to order them by record date. And the reason why I added the order is so that we force Azure to actually do some computation and not just reading the rows and sending them to me over the internet. And if you guys can see, I'm going to be using 4 iterations on 50 threads, right? So we're going to be talking about 200 iterations total for this test. Okay, so I'm going to run it now, and it's going to start the test, and we'll be able to see there how long it takes in the end. So usually it takes about 30 seconds to run the 200 iterations. So there you go. 200 iterations took 34 seconds or so. So I'm going to leave this open here. This one was the basic test. So connected to T1, which is my basic database. And I'm going to start now another test. And the only difference here is, I'll show you guys. So my connection settings, I am connected to T1_S1, right? So that's a standard copy of this database, and it's on the standard 1 level of performance. So I basically just did what I did before at that restore point in time that I showed you guys. I restored as a copy called T1_S1, and then I made it, standard S1 level. You just change it on the portal, and that's it. Okay, so I can run this too as well. So, as you guys can see, let me just zoom in here. As we can see the numbers from both of them really close. So, workload on basic took about 34 seconds. Workload on standard 1 took about 7.5 seconds. If you guys will remember, basic is 5 DTUs. S1 is 20 DTUs, so we are supposed to expect about 4 times the amount of performance, which is not bad at all, actually. If you guys look at the ratio of the numbers, we are actually almost bang on the 4x difference in performance, okay? So that's what really means with the DTU value. It's more of a comparison unit, and you use it in this way, like you'll be able to tell, if something takes a certain amount of time on basic, well, then it gives you an expectation of how long it might take on the other performance levels, right? So in this case, we'll be expecting more or less, it's not an exact, always going to be 4x, but more or less we would expect about a 4 times difference in performance. So this was for selecting data. I'm just going to run one more test. And this one is for updating. So I'm going to do the same thing. Okay, so first one is on the basic T1 database. You guys can see it over there. And then what I'm doing here is I'm just changing a varchar field based on some entity values. And then I run it, I believe it's 500 iterations or so. This is on basic. I'm just going to fire it up now. I believe this is kind of similar. It should take about 30 seconds or so on the basic as well. Or at least that's what it usually takes on the previous runs that I've done. Now, if you guys can see something really interesting, we're actually getting exceptions from the service. So let me open that up. So look at what it says here, right? We're running on basic, and it actually says, let me zoom in on it. The request limit for the database is 30 and has been reached. So in this case, on this test, we also not only do we get, the what was it, 30 seconds, but it's also, we also got 21 times. 21 times out of 500, we were actually told, hey, you're on your limit, you need to slow it down here, buddy. So that was the basic test. Now, if we try it, let's do the same test with the standard one. And I'm just going to put it right here and just run it. So you guys can see, let me put the numbers really close here. Let me zoom in on it. Okay, so in this case, for the update test, we got a more or less a 3x. So in this case, we didn't quite get the 4 times improvement that we got from just selecting. We got more or less 3 times in improvement, but also note that we don't get any exceptions on standard 1 as opposed to basic 1, where 21 of our requests were rejected by the servers, basically because we were over our limit, right? So think about that is we got it's not just about how fast it goes as well. It also gives you the capability to have more concurrency, right? So whereas basic would only it got angry a couple of 21 times because it said, hey, you're going over 30 requests. Standard just didn't care. It's all good. It didn't give us any errors, and it did complete the 500 iterations as we would have expected. Okay. All right. So, and then just to finish up today, Let me go over really quick about some of the cool stuff that is coming cloud first. So like I said, the cool thing now about Azure SQL Database is it kind of gives you a window into the future of the on-premise SQL Server. So some things that have come out already that are not in the box. So we have dynamic data masking, which is the one that I'm going to show you guys. And this is really cool. It just you can filter out specific columns for a user so that they're not allowed to see. So for example, you could have like credit cards, addresses, emails, all this stuff. You could have it filtered out for the end users and only have it available for admins to be able to see the actual data. We have row-level security. So with row-level security, you can apply a policy that only some specific rows can be accessed by specific users. So usually people would do this with like a view, and they would have special permissions on the view and stuff like that. Well, this is purely on a database configuration level. So even without having to define any other objects, you will be able to limit the specific rows that somebody has access to. So that's pretty cool. Alter column can be done online now. So if any of you has ever tried to do a change on a column on a fairly big SQL Server table, you'll probably know what I'm talking about. It takes a while and it blocks other queries. So this actually is now online on Azure SQL Database, which is really cool. Truncate on a partition level, so you can do that now as well on the Azure SQL Database. For those of you who have worked with partitioning in the box on SQL Server, you'll know that you can truncate the entire table, but you can't truncate just one specific partition. Well, you can do that in the cloud now. And there's another really cool feature upcoming. It's called the SQL Query Store. There's some really good PaaS video. It's actually up on the PaaS Summit website for free. You can watch it, where they introduced this feature at the latest PaaS Summit. And it's basically going to be kind of like a change tracker of all your different execution plans. So if your performance suddenly got really bad over a query, you can go in and check the past execution plans that the query had, and then say something like, you know, I want to revert to the plan that we had last week. So that will be coming as well to the on-the-box product, but we're going to get it cloud first, and that's upcoming. It's not there yet, but it will be coming to the cloud SQL database. So just to finish up today, let's just want to show you guys what, for example, the dynamic data masking looks like. So let me go back into the portal. Oh, if you guys can see, it looks like my copy T1 restore copy is done now. So that's it. So that's the restore pointing time on Azure, and then I can connect to it just like I can with any other of the Azure databases. Okay. So I have this database here that I use for this demo. It's called Last.fm dataset. It's basically a bunch of music-related information. And if I go down here, just to show you guys, there's a little box here that says Dynamic Data Masking. So I can click on it. And then once I'm here, I can actually set up the type of masking rules that I want. So if you guys will see, I have a box here that says privileged logins, and it says app admin. So only the users that I put in this privileged logins box will be able to look at the data without the mask that I specify, okay? And then all the different masking rules, you specify them here. You can have more than one. I only have one set up right now. Okay, so I'm going to click on it just to show you guys how easy it is to set something up. So this opens another blade, and I basically have to select four different things. So it says if I want to mask by a table and a column, then I pick a table, which was the artist rates. So let's assume we're like some kind of music service, and we are saving how much we pay each artist, but we don't want anybody, just anybody, to know how much we are paying them. Only the application admin will be able to know the exact number that we're paying them. So the column rate is the one that we're going to be masking, and then you just pick how you're going to mask it. So in this case, it's a mask that's going to replace by a default value. For example, in the case of integers, it's just going to replace it with a 0. Okay? So that's how easy it is. You would just, if you had another table with some credit card fields, you would pick the table, you would pick the column that has the credit card fields, and then you would pick something like right here. If you guys can see, there are different masking values. There's already the mask value for the credit card. There's a mask value for a social security number, for an email, for just a number, or for a custom string if you just want to replace it with something that says something like not available or something like that. Okay. And then just to show you guys what it looks like in practice, so let me go back to my VM real quick. And I have 2 connections already done to this last FM data set that I have on the cloud. And they're both just doing a select star from artist rates. So if I execute this now, well, let me reconnect. There we go. So you guys can see this is the application admin account. And then I have all the artists, and I can actually see the rate for all of them. And if I switch over to the application user, let me reconnect as well. And let me just zoom in right here so you guys can see. So this one is the application user. It is not in the list of privileged logins. So really easy to tell, right? All the rates, they are dynamically zeroed out by the engine because we're going through that lower privilege account, right? I don't have to do anything. I don't have to touch any code. I don't have to do anything on the application side either. It's just basically tell SQL Server, hey, if you're not on this list, you're not allowed to see the data, and this is what you're going to get in return instead. And, I can see it right here, right now. So that's something really cool. Security related, available now on Azure SQL Database, and probably coming soon on the in-the-box SQL Server. And like I said, it's just a cool thing how we get kind of like a preview of what the future SQL Server on-premise product will be by these features released now cloud first as well. So that was the end for the material I had for today. I hope it was a good overview in general for everybody. Let's just move on to the questions. Steve, do you have a list there? Are there some good questions?
Yes. Well, there's some questions, and I think you may have answered some of them, but I'll just read them off.
Yeah, no worries.
And as they were asked earlier, someone asked about the point-in-time restore. What's the time window in it? You can go, for example, 7 days behind current time with 7 possible restore points. I'm not positive I understand that, but maybe you do.
Yeah, so you can go 7 days back on basic. That's like the bare bones $5 a month service, and you can do any amount of restores that you want up to behind those 7 days. So if I want to do 20 copies of different points in time over the last 7 days, I can. Every time I do a restore, though, I'm creating a new copy, so we'll get charged for that new copy of the database that I created. So there's no limit to how many restores you can do, because they'll basically just charge you for a new copy of the database anyway. I hope that makes sense.
Okay. You may have said something about this. What if the size goes over 500 gigabytes?
Oh, it's just going to stop. It'll tell you, yeah, you can't put any more data in, and that's it. So in that case, you would need to come up with, if you want to keep using it and you need to keep growing, then what you need to do is come up with some kind of scale-out strategy, right? So that goes beyond beyond the scope of a fundamentals level talk, but there are basically a couple of ways that you can do this. I mean, you could do this on your application, and the Azure team has developed an API that they call the Elastic Scale API, so that you can have, for example, 3 or 4 databases all separate, and they're all acting as if they're like one database, and you scale out. You can keep adding more databases horizontally instead of just keep increasing the size of your database vertically.
Okay. This one's sort of a follow-on, but I don't think it's exactly what you were saying. For the 500 gigabytes, can you have that have multiple distinct files, or does this have to be just one database?
Yeah, it has to be one database. There's no concept of files or storage or anything. You have all that taken away from you. It's all abstracted from you. It's just basically this is how is the size of your database, like aggregated, and that's it. That's how much they will allow you to have. So it's not like a per file limit or anything like that, because you don't even see the files.
Okay. Are AD logins supported?
So AD logins are not supported yet. I believe they are working on getting, for example, you could have your AD synchronized with like an Azure AD, and then you could use those, but right now it's limited to SQL logins only.
Okay. Can we schedule jobs on Azure?
So that's another one. Right now, the way you would do that is, you could have just maybe like a VM and just run jobs off of the VM. 2, there is a job scheduler in Azure. You would have to basically code, I believe you can describe the jobs in JSON or PowerShell, and then you would run that. They are working on, though, an actual scheduler, but that's, to be determined when eventually it comes out.
Okay. How soon will you be able to pull a backup from a third-party FTP site, restore the backup, and then kick off some procedure to populate tables in the database?
Well, it depends. You can't just take a backup from an on-prem SQL and restore it as an Azure SQL database. Usually what people do is they'll create an export, like a backpack file, that you can restore up to SQL database. So, I mean, how fast? It really depends on, there's too many factors there, right? Because it depends on how big your backup is. It depends on the speed of your connection. It depends, like you could have like a connection for Azure just with a VPN. You could have it with a special connection called ExpressRoute. So there's really too many variables to be able to say, this is how fast you can do it. It really depends on like way too many things. I would say if somebody wants to really try it out, just sign up for the free trial and try it with one of your databases. See how long it takes with your current setup, and you can probably see if it's something that is good or if there's something that could be improved as well. With faster internet or something like that.
Is transparent data encryption and column level encryption available in Azure?
TDE is not available. I'm not really sure about column level encryption. I will have to take a pass on that one. I haven't tried it yet.
Okay.
I can find out for sure.
And they can contact you and from all of your contact information. That will be in the recorded session in about 2 or 3 days, so they can get in touch with you if you don't get something answered. Okay, what's the recommended internet configuration or speed?
Well, again, that depends on how much data you're going to be pulling through the pipe, right? Usually, and this is what I tell most of my clients, is that if you're going to be using a cloud database, then you want to have your application server in the cloud as well. Because what you don't want to do is have an application server on-prem that is calling and doing all these database calls through the internet. What you want to do is have your application server in the cloud, have your database in the cloud, and only your actual user interaction to be done through the internet.
That makes sense.
Now, what the actual minimum is, it really depends on your application, right? If you're going to be pulling thousands of rows over the internet, then probably you're going to need a beefier connection than if you're only going to be pulling, a 20-row report aggregate or something like that.
This user said that they would like you to talk a little bit about federation.
Yeah, so federation used to be a scale-out strategy where you would define basically, let's say if you had a table, you could define it to be federated over an X amount of databases. That was retired by Microsoft. It's deprecated right now, and they're moving every client that was using federations to use the ElasticScale.NET API that I was mentioning. So federations, it was a scale-out strategy, and it was on the database level that you could specify how it was federated. But at this point, it is deprecated, and Microsoft does not recommend that you go down the federation path. They're retiring it, and they would recommend today that you start looking into the ElasticScale API.
Does Azure include the entire BI stack? I'm looking for an environment that also exposes SSIS, SSRS, and SSAS features, mainly because I don't want to maintain those environments. It's a good idea.
Yeah, so I would say, well, depends. So you can always just run a VM. If you're just interested in having a cloud environment, so you don't have to provision your own space or, like I said, your own virtualization layer, and you can have a VM in the cloud and you can install all the VI tools to your heart's content. Now, if you're looking to something that's a little bit more managed, it is not as easy as just saying this is SSIS, this is SSRS, and this is SSAS, but what we have is different services. So you can have an Azure SQL database. Now, for actual data ETL, there is a service called Azure Data Factory, so you have to look into that, but it is possible. Then for actual reporting, you could use something like Power BI, which is another cloud service, and Power BI is now on the new preview service, which is going to be even better, because I believe it's going to be $10 a month for a user, and if you're familiar with Power BI, you guys know it's really easy to just ingest some data. You know, you do a bunch of clicks and suddenly you have a report that looks pretty nice. So there are other services. There's not going to be like SSIS in the cloud, this is SSRS in the cloud, this is SSAS in the cloud. There's other type of services that offer similar functionality, but it's not going to be like a straight up, you know, migration. You have to possibly look into what you have now and how it would fit in on these new cloud services. If that is too much work, and then I would say if you just want to take advantage of the ability to quickly deploy and to quickly scale up or scale down hardware in the cloud, then it's easier if you just go with a VM and install SQL Server on the VM and just use the services that you're already familiar with.
Okay. When opening a local program, if I was connecting to an Azure database, is there encryption for the data to and from my PC? And when, during the login process to the program, does this encryption start?
Yeah, so it is encrypted. I believe it's done at the driver level. So, I mean, I would have to Wireshark something to actually be 100% at what level it is, which I haven't done, but I believe it's done at the driver level.
Okay. What's the frequency of the backups? Every minute, 30 minutes, hourly?
It's supposed to be, as I understand it, it's supposed to be every 5 minutes.
Okay. And this is somewhat like somebody asked earlier, they probably would need a VM. Can we use Azure for SSIS package deployments?
Yeah, so it's exactly like you just said. You would need a VM, right? There is no concept of SSIS inside an Azure SQL database. It is exactly what the name implies. It is a SQL database. These parallel services, you have to deploy a VM, or like I said, you have to look into the actual Azure services that do something similar, like Azure Data Factory for SSIS, for example.
This may be the same, but I'm not sure. Can we use assemblies in the Azure database?
I think so. I think it's very new. So the latest version of Azure SQL Database, they call it the V12. So if you guys are going to be searching around information online for Azure SQL Database, you might see a lot of references lately on something called the Azure SQL V12. And this is the latest version of the servers that where they enabled partitioning, they enabled the column stores, and I think they enabled CLR as well. But it's very it's very limited in the way that you're not allowed to put anything that's unsafe or unsafe assemblies, because they can't run the risk of you do something weird with .NET and then crashing the machine where everyone is running. So I believe you're only allowed to take code from some specific assemblies to create your own and import them into Azure. So the answer is yes, but you'll probably have a safer, more limited sandbox than what you would be used to doing on-prem.
This is a good question. Can you download the database back physically?
Yeah, so you have to do, and I didn't show that as part of the demos, but there's a button there for export, and basically it'll generate like a backpack file for you to take back. And then once you have that, you can just deploy to the on-prem SQL server.
Okay, well, that's all the questions. I really appreciate this. This has been a great presentation. I can't wait to try it out for myself. That's why I wanted you to kind of do some of the introduction and how to get into it and how to use it for free. Our winner of the $25 gift card is Lance England. And next month, we're going to have Adam Bielczuk doing a talk on XML without Xanax, how to handle XML in the SQL Server. I think that'll be really good. Oh, one more question. Is there any instant level configuration limitation if I install SQL Server inside of VM?
No, you can do whatever you want. Inside a VM, it's all up to you. Because basically on that VM, they're giving you a virtual computer, right? And then you're allowed to do whatever you want inside the virtual computer. It's not Microsoft's responsibility to control what you do inside the VM. So you can take a VM and install SQL Standard. You can install SQL Enterprise. On Azure, you can even just pay as you go. So you could create a VM in a pay-as-you-go model with SQL Enterprise. And you can go and just search for the Azure Online Calculator, and it actually gives you an estimate of how much that would be. So for example, if you are doing a new deployment and you guys really think you can get a lot of value about some enterprise features and you don't want to do the upfront investment of paying for the enterprise licenses, which we all know are pretty expensive, you can actually look into on the Azure Online Calculator how much it would be to instead pay as you go. So basically you're kind of like renting the license as you go.
I think we had a user talk about that earlier. Okay, well, I really appreciate it, and this session will be probably up in 2 to 3 days at our archive site, and they can get the slides and examples off of your site or at our site at the same time. So be sure and sign up for the session next month, and we'll see you May the 5th. Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Have a good day.